invite Dr. Gamal Nasser to the microphone.
Your Excellencies, I stand on existing protocol, and also to express my outrage at what Comrade Kwesipat just said about the statement that was issued by the government of Ghana in the aftermath of the crisis that have unfolded in the past couple of days. Initially, I wanted to just come and then make a presentation to share ideas. But after that outrage, I thought that it would be important to give some graphic representations in the form of a PowerPoint presentation to bring to light the real issues so that it would expose the level of either ignorance or hypocrisy of those who claim to be representing us. On the other hand, beyond the outrage, I just thought to myself, what else do we expect from a neo-colonial puppet regime like the one we have? But I took solace in the hope that very soon we shall be seeing the back of this clearly a neo-colonial and puppet regime. See, when it is attributed to ignorance, I don't buy that argument, especially at the level of government. It is not ignorance, because ignorance is a voluntary disease. And at that level, it was possible to either issue a statement that takes into account the real dynamics of the history of the Palestinian people, along the lines of what the AU, or African Union issued. So it's in light of this widespread ignorance, or let's say hypocrisy on the part of those whom I believe know, but they are just singing their master's voices. But for the vast majority who sympathize with the Palestinian people and want to put up a defense, it's important to arm ourselves with the relevant facts. And this is what I intend to do in this presentation. First of all, we'd have to debunk that false narrative that what constitutes the state of Israel today was a barren land, devoid of natural resources, a desert which the Jews made to bloom, and that now it has the best agriculture in the world, technologically very advanced. By the way, analogous arguments were made on behalf of South Africa at the height of the apartheid regime. And as Africans, would have to look at this argument and make a juxtaposition to see whether we cannot draw some lessons from that. So the mainstream media highlights this and goes on further to claim that Israel today deserves sympathy because it's a victim of some historical persecution. And reference is made to the pogroms that took place in Western Europe, the persecution of the Jews, leading to the Second World War and during the Second World War, and that theirs is a struggle for survival. And we often hear that Palestinians, their resistance, such references as militants, as terrorists. In this general narrative, what is missing is the truth about the very violent creation of Israel itself. Now, the history of Palestine dates back several millennia, but for the purposes of the recent crisis, it's important to just limit ourselves to the contemporary political and economic situation and their origins. And I'm sure all of us are aware that that part of the world was under the Ottoman Empire before the First World War. And following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the territories were redivided among the victorious countries of the West, just like Africa was redivided among the colonial powers following the defeat of Germany. So it's very interesting. And what happened? There's a certain similarity between the African experience and what happened in the part of the world known as the Middle East, where Palestine is located now. So the colonial territories were shared among the victorious imperialist nations as mandated territories under the League of Nations. So what Britain received, German East Africa, a quarter of Togoland, a piece of the Cameroons, and France took over the rest of the 3/4 of Togoland and the greater parts of the Cameroons, while Belgium got a slice of German East Africa. I'm emphasizing on the vocabulary here for us to understand how cynical this whole colonial redistribution of the world was. So under this redistribution, under the so-called mandate system, the British mandates were Iraq, Palestine, and then Transjordan. And most of us would have heard of the Balfour Declaration, and I want us to go to the first slide. And Britain, that's the British government, the unilateral decision in 1917, in which it promised to the World Zionist Organization to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine. At the time of this promise, the population of that area, Palestine, was 90% Palestinian and 10% Jewish. And the Palestinian areas, can you see it there? The Palestinian areas are in green and the Jewish areas are in blue. So you can see the percentages of the land distribution. But then, the parceling out of the land to the Jews was not so much something that the sympathy to the Jews as such, but a very parochial British interest. Because British government, what it wanted to do is it wanted to secure Palestine for itself as a strategic point on the land and sea routes to India. And that location also was a strategic link to the oil-rich regions of the Middle East. So a Zionist state under British protection would secure that area for Britain. And mind you, at that time, Britain was the superpower. America was just emerging as an alternative to replace it. So all these dictates were undertaken under the influence of the British Empire. So America would later rise as the leading imperialist power, and the quest for global domination required that they should turn Israel into a military force, a cheaper way of investing in a military base or aircraft carriers so that they can use Israel as that alternative to a military base to consolidate its emerging hegemony and control of the oil-rich areas of that particular part of the world. So we'll go to this slide 2. What were the consequences of the British mandate? Within 30 years, Palestine was transformed completely. Mass migration of Central European and then Eastern European Jews into Palestine. So within 30 years, the Jewish population increased from 6% in 1918 to 33% in 1947. And the Palestinian areas are in green. So you can still imagine how large the Palestinian territory. The Palestinian areas are in green and Jewish areas are in blue. So as the Jews started their influx into historical Palestine, with the support of the British, they started establishing separate institutions: political, economic, social, cultural, military. So they were creating a state within a state. And when they had succeeded in doing that, then they made a drive for independence. We'll go to slide 3. This is the UN partition plan. Is it? No. Slide 3. I think the UN partition plan for historic Palestine in 1947. The UN resolution 181. Palestinian Arabs were to be given 45% of land that was not contiguous. It's separated and not necessarily viable for a modern state to operate. So, and the Jews were given 55%. And Jerusalem was supposed to be under international control. This plan was never implemented. So the drive for statehood continued. And this ignored the presence of a Palestinian majority in what the fact that this Palestinian majority also had their own national aspirations. But for statehood to happen for Israel, there had to be mass expulsions. The Israelites, the Jews, embarked on mass expulsions of Palestinians to neighboring Arab states. And much of this was done through acts of terrorism. And almost 400 Palestinian Arab villages were razed to the ground by the Israeli army, and a policy of constant evictions. And once they evicted, Jews moved in. Jews from where? From Eastern Europe, Western Europe. They all moved in to occupy areas from which Palestinians had been evicted. So we go to slide 4. In 1948, there were further expulsions of Palestinians. And in the war that ensued, the Zionist forces captured 78% of historical Palestine. So you see how the land structure is changing. The Zionist forces captured 78% of historic Palestine, and the remaining 22% was divided into the West Bank and Gaza, and there's a reason why they call it the Gaza Strip. So the Palestinian areas are in green, and Israeli areas in blue. So with this mass usurpation of land, having succeeded in doing that, the Jews then declared independence in 1948. And followed this with continued ethnic cleansing, and 800,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes, and they still live in exile in foreign countries or in Gaza, in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, and they don't have any right of return. So some 12 to 14 million Palestinians are scattered around the world. But any Jew who has never set, any Jew anywhere in the world, who has never set foot on Palestinian soil, has a right to go to Palestine and settle there. And Palestinian homes that were confiscated were given to these new arrivals from Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Now let's go to slide 5. The 1967 war happened, and Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. And the green areas are the occupied West Bank and Gaza, and the blue is the Israeli state. And the light blue areas were areas that the Israeli army captured, and the Egyptian and Syrian lands occupied by Israel. So we have the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula and Syria's Golan Heights. And there has been a deliberate policy of the Israeli state and to prevent the establishment of a future Palestinian state. And they do this by a relentless construction of Jewish settlements in the remaining 22% of historical Palestine, demolishing thousands of homes under very flimsy reasons and encouraging massive Jewish immigration into the occupied territory. And they also erect what has internationally been acknowledged as apartheid walls, which has cut off Palestinians from their farmlands, from their families, from hospitals, and from schools. Of course, these walls proved useless in the recent assault into the occupied territories by Hamas, when they used different techniques to beat the Israeli security, took them completely by surprise, and Israel suffered one of the worst humiliations, in its history. And from all indications, this is just the beginning of worse things to come for the Zionist state. So we move to the next slide, slide 6. Israeli settlement. Mind you, let's concentrate first on the slide on the left, and that is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The one on the right is the West Bank, and what Israel is doing there. The circled green areas are occupied West Bank and Gaza. The blue area is Israel. And the area in the ash is Palestinian area under Israeli control. And the areas marked red, the spots that are there, the red spots, are Israeli settlements built on Palestinian land. These are Israeli settlements, those red spots. The occupied territories, these are Israeli settlements that are built on occupied West Bank. So today, we have about 800,000 Israeli settlers. And the number is still increasing because of a deliberate policy of the Israeli government to encourage settlers. And more than 250 of such settlements in West Bank and East Jerusalem. The red dots you see there are settlements, and there are more than 250 of them in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And all these settlements that you see are illegal under international law. During the apartheid regime, there was a certain word that came into vogue, and they call it Bantustanization. That is the strategy of isolating Palestinian areas from one another, fragmented and disconnected and crowded areas. And then the Bantustans are massive concentration camps, and the objective is to prevent the occurrence of a sizable and continuous stretch of Palestinian territory necessary, which is, of course, a necessary prerequisite for the social, political and economic viability of any state. And this is what Israel is deliberately trying to prevent from happening. So these Bantustan patches of land unconnected among themselves, and each of them surrounded and hemmed in by large Israeli settlements. This can never be pieced together into a viable and independent state. And from all indications, this Gaza has been described as a prison. And literally it is. A small piece of land that's just about a little over 20 kilometers long and a few kilometers wide, accommodating about 2.5 million people. It is the most densely populated place on earth, and is sealed off from the rest of the world by land, by sea, and by air. And it's literally impossible to go out or come into Gaza, into the Gaza Strip. So recently, when that international criminal, Netanyahu, was planning to bomb Gaza, he told the people in Gaza to leave. Leave to where? Where would they go? All the points of exit, except one, are controlled by Israel and they are closed. The one that is not under their control but under Egyptian control cannot be opened without Israeli consent. And when the crisis started and a humanitarian convoy was dispatched to enter Gaza through the Egyptian crossing, what did the Israelis do? They bombed that humanitarian convoy. So leave Gaza to which area? So that is the truth that the mainstream media is not telling us. So apart from this, Israel controls electricity and water supply, and they can turn this off at any time, as they have done now. As we speak, there are more than 2 million people in Gaza have been deprived of electricity and no water. The Israelis have turned this all off. These are some of the reasons why Gaza has been described as a prison. And in fact, a former British Prime Minister, David Cameron, visited Gaza during his prime ministership and described Gaza as the largest open-air prison in the world. Some have even described Gaza as a cage. And if you are in a cage and there's a possibility for you to break out, why won't you take advantage of that possibility? And this is exactly what the Palestinians have been trying to do over the years. The other thing that we need to concentrate on, and I'm just hopping from one topic to other to give us a general idea what to think of, and have something to challenge mainstream narrative about the real situation in the Palestinian struggle. One thing we'll have to understand is that Israel is intrinsically a racist and apartheid state. It's built in the DNA of the Jewish state. It's an apartheid state, just like South Africa was, and also a racist state. And I'm not saying it. It's not pro-Palestinian, people who sympathize with the Palestinian struggle who are saying it. The international human rights organizations, such as Human Rights Watch, have arrived at the same conclusion. And in 2001, they issued a report which clearly classifies Israel as an apartheid state, just like how former Presidents Mandela and then President Jimmy Carter of the United States of America also, classified Israel as an apartheid state. And this is also the verdict of the majority of United Nations member states. And I read something very curious. A former head of Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad, by the name Tamir Pardo, I think he's no longer in office, in a recent interview with Associated Press, also made some very interesting statements to the effect that Israel is an apartheid state, that there's apartheid in Israel. Belated although, but it's important for us to take that into consideration. So when he was presiding over the system that was perpetrating all these atrocities against the Palestinians. Did he believe in that or not? Did he believe that in that or not? So that is the level of cynicism that we'll have to approach in our thinking about what constitutes the leadership of Israel today. And we often hear this word terrorism, and because it has been constantly repeated, it has insinuated itself into our subconscious minds, in such a way that we link it with either Palestinian struggle or any struggle at all that is asymmetric against imperialism. But what is missing in all this is that it was Israel which invented what we call today terrorism. And in fact, 3 former Israeli prime ministers had been terrorists in their earlier political careers. Menachem Begin, before he became prime minister, in the 1940s, was a terrorist, and he led Jewish terrorists in their agitation for their own state in the British-occupied, Palestine. And in 1946, he took part in a terrorist attack on the King David Hotel in Palestine, in Jerusalem, and this killed 91 people. Yitzhak Rabin, who also later became prime minister of Israel, was a leader of a Jewish terrorist group known as the Stern Gang, and was responsible for a string of political assassinations. And the victims of this Stern Gang were Lord Moyne, a British minister representative in the Middle East in the 1940s, 1944 to be as precise. And there's another Count, individual, a British individual known as Count Folk Bernadotte, who as UN special mediator on Palestine in 1948. And incidentally, Winston Churchill himself was a target of an assassination plot by these Jewish terrorists at the time that he was even, leading Britain to fight against Nazi Germany. Then Ariel Sharon, responsible for the Sabra and Shatila massacre, which killed 3,000 people, mostly Palestinians, murdered. These, and their modus operandi is well known. Some involve a level of sophistication that only state actors can do. They forge passports. In one instance, they forged, I think, Norwegian passports, in 2009 in particular, and went to Dubai in a hotel and then murdered a Palestinian official. They have also engaged in a spate of assassinations against Iranian scientists. Why? They think that mastery of science and technology would be a major tool in breaking the myth around Israeli invincibility. So they would want to do anything at all to prevent the emergence of a scientific and technologically strong, adversary, a technologically and scientifically strong country that stands up for the rights, of the Palestinian people and against imperialism and hegemony. So in all this, Israel could not have been doing that alone without the assistance of the United States. We also remember the murder of Yasser Arafat in 2004, through poisoning using polonium. And polonium can only be administered by a state actor. It's a highly radioactive material which is only a state that can possess. So, and the Israeli state has, the capability of doing that. The other thing, fact that we need to know is the deliberate blurring of the nature of the conflict. And I'd want to spend some time on this because in Ghana, it is very pervasive, and also in the United States of America and Western Europe. And it's the fact that the conflict has been largely misrepresented as a conflict with Islam. It's diversionary propaganda. It deliberately ignores the fact that not all Palestinians are Muslims. there is a big and vibrant Palestinian Christian community in occupied Palestine. And there are some interesting statistics to back this argument. Palestinians who are Christians are more than Israelis who are Christians. There are Christians in Israel, there are Christians in Palestine, but there are more Christians in Palestine than there are Christians in Israel. And 7% of the 12 million population of Palestine are Christians. And only 2% of the 8.5 million population of Israel are Christians, while 17.5% of the Israeli population are Muslims. And the Bible of the Palestinians and all Arabs is in Arabic. The Palestinian Bible, the Bible of the Palestinians and all Bibles of Arabic Christians is in Arabic. So when Arab Christians want to say God is great, they say Allahu Akbar. And when they want to say glory be to God, they say Alhamdulillah. So the import of this is that Arabic is not Islam and Islam is not Arabic. Arabic is a language and Islam is a religion. So we should separate this and we shouldn't let ourselves be confused by Western propaganda that seeks to conflate this as if it is a religious struggle between Muslims and Christians. And in fact, Palestinian Christians are considered the living stones of Christianity. They are they are considered as the direct descendants of the disciples of Jesus Christ. And they are united with their Muslim brethren, compatriots, in the struggle against the Israeli occupation. And this is for those, my compatriots, Ghanaians, who take the pleasure in sticking Israeli flags in their vehicles. This is something for you to think about. You may be thinking that that is an expression of your affinity to your religion, your closeness to your religion, but you should know something about the Jews and how they relate to Christianity before you glorify them and try to associate them with the religion that you profess. I don't feel comfortable making this, but it's important to do that so that we arm ourselves self-educated. Why? Because the Jews blasphemously consider Jesus Christ as a false Messiah. And I'm not saying it. A few years ago, the deputy ambassador of Israel to Ghana, his name was Orly Witzman, that was in March 2016 during the Easter celebrations. He granted an interview on a radio station. And to a question relating to this, he told his audience that the Jews are still expecting the Messiah, and that Jesus Christ is not the Messiah that they were expecting. And Jews in general have poured on Jesus, all manner of sacrilegious invectives. And they treat the New Testament, with contempt. And I'll just cite one example. In the Israeli Knesset, the equivalent of a parliament, a member, that is an MP, in the Israeli parliament, his name was Michael Ben-Ari. In making a presentation in parliament, at a certain point, he took the New Testament, because the Bible of the Jews is the Old Testament. But Christians take the Old Testament and the New Testament, put them together as the Christian Bible. So he took the New Testament, and in the middle of the parliament, tore it into pieces and looked for a waste paper basket can, a waste paper, a dustbin. And when he was throwing it into the dustbin, he described that he was discarding it in the garbage can of history. These were his words. And ultra-Orthodox Jews have been spitting on Christians. Just lately, just this month, just about a week ago, on 3rd October, we saw video clips of Jews spitting on Christian worshippers. And these Christian worshippers were retracing the old city route they believed Jesus took before his crucifixion. And when this matter came up, Jewish leaders defended the Jews who spat on the Christians by saying that spitting on Christian clergy and at churches is an ancient Jewish custom. And in fact, the Talmud, which is the book of Jewish law, it makes fun of the birth of Jesus. It rejects the claim that Jesus is a Messiah and maintains that he was rightly executed for blasphemy. This is what the Jews say. So next time, as I said, when our Christian friend, when you see a Jewish flag in a Christian, trying to show his closeness to his religion, engage him to see whether what he's doing, he actually understands what he's promoting, and whether the prophet he believes in, if he sees what he's doing, he would be comfortable or happy with that. And it's even worse than that. And I don't want to go into it, but there's just one thing that I want to mention. I cannot avoid that. Apart from saying that he was rightfully executed, that is crucified for blasphemy, they also claim that his true father was a Roman soldier named Pantera. And that Mary, as I said, I find it difficult to know, but the truth be told, so that we are able to argue, to discuss and debate when the matter arises. They claim that they doubt the chastity of the Virgin Mary and claim that she had an affair with a Roman soldier named Pantera. And it was from this illicit affair that Jesus was born. This is what the Jews are saying. So you can see how far away they are from Christianity. Anyway, I would conclude my presentation by going to the 7th slide, by reiterating the fact that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination. And this is what the United Nations say. And I would want us to read through. This is a United Nations General Assembly Resolution 45-130. That considering, there's a preamble and there were so many other clauses, but I'm taking the most important ones. That considering that the denial of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination, sovereignty, independence, and return to Palestine, and the brutal suppression by the Israeli forces of the heroic uprising, the Intifada, and the Palestinian population in the occupied territories, as well as the repeated Israeli aggression against the population of the region, constitute a serious threat to international peace and security. Okay, after this preamble then, the resolution reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of the peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial domination, apartheid, and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. This is what the United Nations say about it. So resistance against an occupying force is not terrorism by international law. The UN says that it is legitimate struggle, and if it means resorting to arms, you should, if you have the capability. So attacks on Israeli settlements, like what happened, with this latest Hamas attacks, can never be described as terrorism. These were lands, and we shouldn't buy into that propaganda that Israel was attacked. These are occupied territories. They are Palestinian lands illegally occupied by Israel that were attacked. So these were lands that were seized from Palestinians since 1967. Okay, so it is similar to a guerrilla war against an occupying power. So an analogy can be made with what happened during the Second World War when Germany occupied Poland and France. And the Polish formed guerrilla units and started making incursions in the rear of the German, the Nazi army. Would you call them terrorists? No. These were partisans, patriots, who are taking up arms against an occupying force. So the same, fighting against the Nazi troops in occupied France and Poland could not be described as terrorism. So finally, the formula for peace. Israel has to return territories it captured and has been occupying since 1967 in exchange for peace with all its Arab neighbors. In actual fact, the Arab League has presented this alternative. And Hamas has actually, although not recognizing Israel, but it has also shown a willingness to accept this arrangement. Also, the establishment of a Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem as its capital. Israel continues to reject even this minimum demand. And it also refused to implement the peace agreements that were signed by Arafat and Rabin some 30 years ago. See, but history moves in circles and in zigzags. And the tide is changing. And the world is rapidly awakening to the murderous character of the Israeli regime. The propaganda that they have relied upon all over these years is gradually crumbling. Their much touted military and security apparatus has been severely weakened and undermined in the recent, attacks. Even the CIA secretly concedes that Israel is running out of time, and its only choice is to make peace with the Palestinians, and her neighbors, or it will perish. But Israel is intransigent. It believes that it can always use propaganda to hide its crimes, believes that it can never be sanctioned, and recently Netanyahu has vowed to reduce Gaza to dust and rubble. Well, Gaza has been reduced to rubble, dust, 4 times in the last 10 years. Thousands of Palestinians in Gaza have always been massacred. But this only made matters worse for the occupying force. The mass murder of Palestinians will not solve the problem. Otherwise, the massacres from 1948 would have solved the problem. But the future is on the side of the Palestinians, because you cannot permanently lock up people in a cage and expect that they will not attempt to break out. And the Palestinian children who survive this present Israeli bombardment will take over the torch from their parents, just like the fighters today took over from their fathers and grandfathers. The explosion we are witnessing today is the most devastating so far, and the next one will even be more devastating. And the signs are coming with the resurgence of Iran, the resurgence of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the worldwide BBD, that is boycott, diversify. I mean, the same policy that was applied to break the back of Apartheid South Africa is gaining currency. And recently at Harvard University, a group, about a dozen different student organizations came out and issued a statement putting the entire blame on the recent crisis on the Israeli government. That was a remarkable shift. The public opinion is shifting, and you can fool all the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all of the time. Yeah. So the days of the Israeli swagger are numbered, and its policy of tying itself to the apron strings of the United States, that policy is doomed, because the balance of power in the world is changing very fast. The heavyweight, that is the American imperialist hegemon, is heading down for the count. And the first punch resulted in the great and humiliating escape from Afghanistan. And the second is the imminent defeat that is awaiting NATO in Ukraine. So this is the real situation in Palestine. And we in Ghana, we in the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, we stand in solidarity with the Palestinians. And at any time at all, we'll raise our voices. Even if our government is moving in the wrong direction, we would move in the right direction and bring focus onto the true history of Palestine and the true objectives of the struggle. And everywhere in history, no matter the oppressor in the final analysis is defeated. And this is a historical imperative. So Palestine is not a matter of if, it is when it is going to be liberated. And the signs in the past 1 week are clearly showing that events are moving very fast in the direction of liberation for the Palestinian people. I thank you very much for your attention.
Viva Palestine! Viva! Viva Palestine! Viva!